Thanks. Sorry about that. So obviously, lots of different backgrounds. Lot of B2B, B2C, and again within those very different kinds of user bases. I think when you look at B2B products, I think you start to understand the whole gamut of different kinds of user personas who use it, different functions, and forget the whole selling process into those organizations, right? And so similarly, on the B2C side, you see when you work at Samsung ads, obviously working with an OEM, seeing, I mean, such a large fraction of humanity that uses those kind of phones, to your Flipkart and Myntra, which have become kind of ubiquitous products in India, right? So, I mean, given these different kinds of user bases that you work with, the different kinds of organization maturity that each of your different companies have been at, obviously user research looks very different across any of those kinds of companies, right? And similarly, I think the people who do that research and the people who have that insight will change from context to context. Also want to start by like kind of setting the table where this whole concept of user research or the whole function of user research has been fairly nascent in India. And I think I remember maybe 6 or 7 years ago looking on LinkedIn for people for someone I was working with to hire a user researcher. And literally, I remember I think there were maybe 5 or 6 people with the job title of user researcher on LinkedIn. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. I think if you look at today, like I haven't looked at it, but I guess that would be somewhere in the hundreds, right? Most likely. People having full-time user research teams. And I've started to understand the importance of user research in developing products, right? So I think what I'd like to start with is starting with Senthil, if we could talk a little bit about how is research currently conducted in your organization? Why is it conducted? And what is the role of research in driving, your product strategy or your roadmap?
Thanks, Pranay. Obviously talking to the choir here. So user research, great user research leads to great products. So that's a fundamental reason why we want to build a user research practice in the organization. So currently we have a user experience design that team takes the responsibility of doing user research. The way we conduct firstly about the type of user that we deal with, there are 3 types of users. User number 1 is all internal users who deliver services and experience to the end customers. Then there is a customer users. So we also deliver SaaS type of services to the customers. So we have customer users. So that's one territory of users. And then we also have something called suppliers. Suppliers are the guys who power the ecosystem in delivering the service and solution to the customers. So these are the 3 types of user. So generally when we look at these 3 types of users, we see the internal users are slightly easily accessible, but customers users we don't get a lot of face time with them. So having a very quality research to ensure that we get some of the input so that the product that we deliver is not way off. So that's what the first primary objective that we have. The way we do user research in our organization is that the general methods, starting with the interviews wherever possible, we wanted to have more face time with the users, so we get the right information from the users, because it's not only about reading the pain point from the user, but also understanding the emotions and the aspirations of the user. Thereby, we can shape the product into a great product. Right? So usually the interviews and focus group studies applies, but given the users, given our organization works as a global scale. So we have users spread across the countries. So it's very difficult to get a easy face time with them. So we make a lot of tools, the usual remote tools that we have to do the user research very effectively. Also, we do recording sessions. So we see how the user behaves. There's a lot of observation that goes into the practice. Rather than interviews and inquiries, it's more an observation-related solutions are what we believe in. So that's a thing that we do heavily on. And then finally, we also tap into some of the people who work with these users, so that we get to their observation is also taken into consideration. So that's how the different ways that we do user research.
Right. And how will add to that? Like, how do you share those insights that you generate with your team?
Yeah, two parts to it. So generally, we want user research information should be democratized across organization. So everybody should have an access to this. Whosoever, so because there are a lot of parties involved in the product building process, it's a co-creation exercise. So we have product management function, we have engineering function, technology function, we also have business and sales function. Everybody has to have an understanding and perspective of this thing. So keeping this information very common is a very important tenet. So what we do is that we use usual tools. We have a space in Confluence. So all the user research get provided there. Secondly, we also call out for user research readouts. So user research readouts, whoever is the lead, who has distilled the information on user research, calls for a readout, and the readout is getting published to a wider audience. So that's another way to do that. And continuously we prune our best practice of user research. So we have the common tool where we continuously update our best practices in user. What are the success products that we have seen? What made the success product success? What are the user research component that has made the product success? And that get doctrined into a best practice document that we have. So these are the ways that we try to commonize this information so that it is accessible to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We can start moving on. If we could do a quick round of who your users are and how research is conducted and shared with the team, that would be helpful.
Sure. So both the two organizations that I've worked with are primarily into B2B part of users. So we try to understand the user persona very much in detail. The current organization I work with, the user personas are mainly people who are into brands, so people who are into consumer insights, or people who are into product. So mainly the product managers or people who are into UX design. So in terms of user research, we get the on-ground information through the field people, which is the sales folks. So we get information from them through qualitative ways. And the other thing that we follow is we have a solution of ours, which is mainly into facial coding and eye tracking. We do that with the end users who are really okay with this idea, and we take that input as well. So these are the two ways that we have been doing user research.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so at Samsung, it's difficult to say. So we have a team of 70 product managers, right? So and this is just the India team I'm talking about, and these are products which even conceptually, right? Even if you bucket them B2B, B2C, are like conceptually about 7 or 8 different ones. I can speak directly about ads, but we have, say, something like a camera, right, where it's a massive differentiator, and it's a very, very different strategy for UX research because there are two aspects to it. One, you want very high context feedback. So one of the things the product team has done is they've got this initiative called Expert Tribe, right? So where they essentially recruit expert photographers and they engage with them in regular focus groups, because if you go around and ask about the camera functionality, everyone has an opinion. But there is an opinion which matters more. And that's a very high context research, right? So they have this concept. In ads, we have, even though we have one product, we have two different kinds of product experiences. Essentially it's a SaaS product. I want advertisers to come onto my platform, find it very easy to buy ads and have repeatability of use, right? So easy programmatic buying. Folks are basically like a trading terminal using it on a daily basis, but then the ad experience by itself is very, very user-centric, right? So particularly for a company which makes its bread and butter from selling devices, the last thing you want is a tiny revenue affecting, a massive pie of revenue. So which is why our ad experience and, say, the content experience, that is a completely different philosophy. So for my SaaS kind of usage, I have senior researchers who essentially would do very similar to what Senthil mentioned, right? So they would conduct exercises, talk to agencies, talk to our internal users, create decks, readouts, and basically present a whole document on what features need to be changed. But the ad experience, we do a lot of closed betas, and then we do callouts, right? Because you have the ability, you can never really get these insights at scale, and then you have the ability to, if you've got 70 million devices out there and you want to try it out on a few thousand, you can do that and then get some experience. So that's like within ads itself, we have that delta.
Very nice. And I really like what you said about having different philosophies for different kinds of products that you work on. Similarly, also that everyone has an opinion, but not every opinion matters the same. Right?
Yep.
Like where you work with experts in the field to actually shape your photography experience, as opposed to just asking anybody, how does this camera feel to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another example, right? So there is an India-specific product that we have. It's called Alt-Z. It comes in some of the mid-range phones, right? It's a very India-specific problem that our phone is shared by family members, in the sense that it's not a very private thing like the US, where nobody will touch your phone. So it has a mode where you could switch immediately, and a lot of your personal communication gets locked out, right? Now that's a very India-specific need. Now for that, you need some very geography-focused research, and you want numbers before you make the business case to, say a company that is going to make product designs in Korea. And for India, we need this very, very specific feature. So that's probably where we need scale, and in camera, we need expertise.
No, but that's actually an example of a brilliant insight, right? Which is that in India, people share their phones, which is not very intuitive. Like, it doesn't come to you, obviously. Sure, like growing up, you may have shared a phone with people, and later, everyone that we know probably has their own phones. But do you know how this insight came about? Like, what was it that helped the Samsung team understand that, okay, a lot of people who are buying our phones are actually using it for a shared purpose across different family members?
So this specific one, I mean, I'm representing a different team here, so might be misquoting, but I believe there are certain hypotheses the product team comes up with based on other channels of communication. So there are Samsung forums, there's Twitter. So there's that team in particular which works with mobile features is regularly tracking Twitter. And then there are these expert influencers who are tracking in terms of what they're saying in the product. So there you create a certain hypothesis, but then you do extensive research within the Samsung forum to gauge, some appetite for these. But that's pretty much at the need assessment stage. Mm-hmm. The challenge is, again, when you're making a feature like this, then as you go towards building it out, you want to do closed betas and see if it's really getting any uptake.
Very cool. Thanks. Sorry, I had to double click on some of the things you said, but we'll move on now.
Yeah. So, as Senthil pointed out, we also have a dedicated UX research function within the product org, which has a focused way of conducting user research. So we don't rely only on the output from that team, because we want everybody to be close to the problem statement. So the product managers extend the research. We also encourage the designers to extend the research. Apart from that, the business team doing their own bit of research, and business team also engage agencies to get data, which cuts across multiple cities, competitor analysis, where we want a concise format within a very short duration of time. So user research for us is slightly different because of the journey the consumer goes through. Like our cycles are close to anywhere between 0 to 180 days. The customer emotion changes. We will not be able to pinpoint and say that this is the phase where the customer felt this could be the problem. We'll have to run across multiple time frame, debate, assimilate this information, process this information, constantly debate among our teams to come to a radius into which we see there's a possibility of a solution. So we'll never be able to say that this is going to solve the problem. So, and we also constantly validate this research. Say we come with some insight just before starting of the product. We go back with our hypothesis and do another research during the prototyping phase. Constant validation of the research is needed in our journey, because we would want to fail fast rather than build something big and then realize that we've shot in the dark. So that's to sum up on our user research functions.
Thank you.
So, Chandni?
Yeah. So actually not very different from a lot of insights we've already got, why we're doing the user research. In my observation, I've seen it's usually in two buckets. One is the traditional route, which we've already discussed, that, if there's something big happening, if there's a customer value proposition that we need to change, we need to do an app rehaul or change the navigation, etc. Then there's a very detailed user research that is conducted. And the other bucket would usually be, which has ongoing research by multiple functions, multiple teams, because they need to get some of their smaller questions answered. What kind of design, what kind of creative, and it's while it might be incremental in nature, over time it sort of gives the long-term result. So that's how I've seen user research running parallelly in e-commerce for a very long time. Of course, I also realized that over the last 1 year, as I'm saying this is changing, because when I would be in a Myntra or Flipkart, it would be a one-time research, and we would all the teams would sort of align on a particular solution that we want to build, depending on the top insights that have come up. But in B2B, it becomes complex because again, there's each geography saying a different story, each category, non-discretionary category saying a different story, but you still got to build a solution which sort of talks to all of them. So it becomes, I think, doing constant conversations with consumers have become the norm, especially in B2B. That's what I'm seeing, that we can't do without it. Even my, freshers like designers will have to do conversations on a daily basis, weekly basis to get their intuition right. So I think that's usually how I've seen the user research evolve.
Nice. And I actually want to press upon something we spoke about yesterday as well, which was, I think, in the kinds of organizations I think most people have worked at, there are dozens of dashboards, right? Like you have every single data point that you can look at every cutoff, daily, weekly, sometimes hourly, different customer types. And in all this noise, right, how do you train your teams to actually draw an actionable insight, like some kind of truth about a customer that you can actually act on and build a solution for? So how do you distinguish between just data versus like an actual insight and take it from there?
Absolutely. So actually that has been one of the challenge which we have been trying to deal with, increasingly, saying that now since a lot of teams are doing research, there's wealth of insight. How do we prioritize these insights? What is the needle mover? What should we be working on first, right? And I also learned that experienced truth was very different from spoken truth. So if I were going to tell teams this is what we found, I didn't see equal amount of participation amongst all teams, marketing, product, creative. They all need to sort of align in a certain way. So how do I make sure that this trickles down across teams? And that's where democratizing user research sort of, I've been seeing that pattern form organically. I've seen leaders stepping down, going and meeting their customers on a very frequent basis, saying that do we all align on the intuition that we're building? I think to hit the nail on the head, there's a lot more thinking and time being spent to identify these are the top 3 solutions we'll be working on versus how it used to happen before.
Cool, awesome. And over to you, Akhil.
Sure. I think one benefit of having worked across multiple organizations actually is to be having that perspective across how different companies have run research. And I've seen, say, some of the parallels being drawn with, say, what Senthil said, with what Himanshu said, with something that Vinod also said. But typically, I would say there are 2 types of researches. One is more of an aggregate analysis of what the user really wants. So typically at a company like Expedia or Amazon, what would happen is you'd probably try and understand the user journey when you're actually building 0 to 1 products. And I'm assuming that was similar when you actually did that camera feature in there. And that is much more broad-based. So you'll actually end up interviewing a lot more people. You would actually get aggregate data, secondary research plus primary research. There'll be focus group discussions as well. And then you'd find certain researches, I think, which you mentioned, Chandni, which are more iterative in nature, which is where each product team tries to come up with their own product feature set, and they actually also need insights on an ongoing basis. At that point, you would see a hypothesis being formed based on the user behaviors that you've seen. Typically, you'd see companies such as Adobe having a beta testing, say, website in there where you would have very similar kind of approach where you would recruit people who are Photoshop users, say they are pros in general. So you basically want a very specific kind of insight from them. You'd probably find a lot of the people who you would want to recruit for a specific feature usage. So there'd be beta programs, and then you would want to do user testing, eye movement testing that Raj said. A lot of those things actually happen when you actually create a prototype at that point. And a lot of those insights actually help you to define how this feature should look like going forward. So I've seen both types of researches in this world overall, but then I think a lot of the B2C companies, and I think a lot of the startups actually rely on product managers and say designers to build their own insight and intuition. while some of the larger setups would actually have dedicated user research teams where they'll share the research, do a very, very dedicated exercise around this, and then probably do that on a repository.
Nice. And how does it currently work at Razorpay?
So at Razorpay, I am taking care of the website overall. So there are various pages on the website itself. So you'd see, say, something like a pricing page, how people actually view a pricing page within our B2B or an SME user base. You try and understand, say, what sort of transparency do we require for our users. You try and identify those kind of researchers. So typically a user researcher, we did not have a user researcher earlier, and we recruited one very recently. And now we are actually going into the market, trying to understand various prototypes at this stage, and then trying to understand what their users' emotions would be, how they would start using that. Are there any insights on that page? Should we change the format? And then there are iterations based on that.
Got it. So I think so many interesting opinions and experiences. I think there's important segues I want to get into all of you with or on something or the other. Himanshu, the first question is for you. And given again the scale at Samsung, the scale of just the teams, like you said, you have 70 product managers, multiply that by what, 8, 10, 12 engineers each, plus the designers and everyone. Who are the people you want informed on specific user insights to drive their decision making, right? What are some of the challenges that you face in actually going ahead and conducting this research that actually drives that kind of insight?
Yeah, so again, what I mentioned earlier, right, that is the prime sort of basis for all the challenges, right? The fact that you do not have the same needs across products, right? So, and there are some things which essentially create these challenges. So for example, one big issue that we have with Samsung products, which are really at the frontier, right? So, just like any other big tech company, Samsung is working on immersive experiences, right? Work on VR headsets and stuff like that, right? So now something of that nature requires high privacy. So you're probably working in complete stealth, right? So nobody essentially knows the shape of your product, and so you need very strong NDAs, and you still need scale because something like an immersive experience has to be understood at scale. There are issues with nausea, jarring images, etc., which you have to understand, right? So I sit on a floor where I see fellow product managers testing it out, but that's just a very small set. You can't really take these out in the market to do betas because it's a highly competitive, something that's actually just very, very infant stage. So that's like, so for example, would be one source of issue where you would want to recruit like a research panel, but there are a lot of privacy concerns, right? The other concern would be the fact that some products have to be scaled geographically. So we have this philosophy in our product team here where we say we build in India and take it abroad, right? So a lot of things get tested here. You get to a certain stage of maturity, get it accepted, and then you try to move it. So particularly in the pay segment, right? So Samsung Pay is now Samsung Wallet. They are trying to make sure they're tagged into our UPI, Aadhaar, everything, so that your phone is like a wallet. You can carry your driving license, quickly go to the DigiLocker. But the moment you want to understand even the user need beyond, say, a geography like India, you have to start thinking of how do you expand user research very, very quickly, right? So the geography becomes another big barrier, right? And then context as well, right? So like I mentioned, camera is one example. When I look at ads, we have our intake actually happening at all levels, like user research, where a UX researcher is doing it, closed betas, where we are statistically getting data on the dashboards and trying to understand, just user behavior. But we have a very strong product marketing team because ultimately you're talking in a very, very competitive landscape of ad agencies. So you have to keep hearing what folks are asking for. And product wants to be as close to all of this, but not necessarily can because it's a big org, right? And everyone's doing their own user research. So that becomes a massive challenge. I would say there is, from my earlier stint as an entrepreneur, there was another challenge. At Zapper, we were trying to pivot our tech. We had a very good content recognition tech, and we are pivoting to voice-enabled software, right? So we're working, including some of the folks here. We actually were very close to selling to Flipkart. We had a product where we were building a contact center, analytics software. Now the challenge is you're in an MVP stage. You want to go from 0 to 1 very quickly. But the user is a very, very specific user. These are folks who do quality audits in contact centers, right? I can use all my B school contacts, probably find 10 people. But if you want to do MVP at scale, how do you source people who have 0 to 1 intuition for a product that doesn't exist? This product doesn't exist. We are trying to create a product for folks who actually exist in large numbers, but we can't access them. So that was another challenge I can think of, where sourcing folks for user research was a big problem. I think if startups had access to a pool where for their use case they could get numbers or source numbers for user research in sort of an NDA stealth mode, that could be a massive benefit. So that was another challenge I faced prior.
Nice. So what I'm hearing is, one is the challenges of scale, both geographically within a country, of course, how important privacy is, and I think we'll go more into privacy. Obviously, you're talking about going to market, but there will be privacy concerns even within an organization who gets access to what information. I think people will cover that, and of course, like you said, there was context and how do you actually recruit users. I think this is what I hear. Want to now move on to Akhil. I think you had a few interesting things to say about this. So, and I think you said that until a couple of years ago, you didn't have a user researcher. So I'm sure we're going to hear some exciting challenges from you as well. Would love to.
Sure. I think Himanshu actually captured a lot of that in terms of, say, when you're actually doing some innovation in the market and you want to recruit specifically with an NDA in there, then the scale becomes a challenge. I think one of the other challenges that I've seen overall is part of the process itself. And then I am assuming in most of the cases, it becomes very, very difficult, and it's mostly a subjective exercise at the end. So how do you interpret results is a very, very tricky, field in there. So you can actually ask leading questions within the user research, and then you'd get leading answers to that. At times, you'd probably want to do you'd get into a confirmation bias with respect to anything that you've already determined as a feature set. So I would say that would also be a challenge overall, apart from recruiting people. I think democratization of that information also is a big challenge, because then you have, Chandni mentioned that, I guess. So marketing teams would have done their own research, product teams would have done their own research, and designers would have had their own insights in there. So typically, to get everyone on the same page and get similar insights across, or say collate the insights, align the insights across these types of researches is going to be a big challenge within any sort of organization in that.
Nice. I think what you spoke about with how subjective it is and how bias prone some of these exercises can be, and ultimately your job is to seek the truth, right? While removing these filters that different people come to a problem with. What have you found that actually works to pick the right problem statement, design an excellent on-point questionnaire, make sure that whatever research is being evaluated, whatever data is being evaluated from that research is actually being looked at, obviously subjectively, because you have to understand the user's context and experience to be able to connect dots, but also being objective, right? It's not that two people on the same team can look at the same data and draw opposite conclusions, which I've seen happen many times, right?
Yes.
Even in my own experience, I've seen, one report where I look at it, I think the exact opposite, or the wording was just off, that where something was called important or somewhat important, where I'm no, but if you look at it against all the other things, this is actually not important, right? And that's just one example. And how do you then ensure that kind of end-to-end airtightness and making sure that all your people are kind of driven by seeking truths rather than being right?
Sure. So I've seen frameworks being applied in companies such as Expedia and Adobe as well. While some of the startups actually do a lot more open-ended research in my experience. I think to get someone on the same page and do that objectively, you'd probably have to have a very, very clear end outcome that you're trying to achieve. So, for example, the answer should not be what solution you're really looking at, but probably say the question should be to understand how the user is experiencing a product or need, or where do they get, where is the pain point across that journey. So you would typically approach a user research exercise to build a customer journey rather than answer the question specifically around building a solution around that. So that is a framework that you could use. Typically, there could be other kind of ways to also hone into the problem. Say if you have a particular problem in there, you would rather not go ahead with a solution in the more broad-based research. You try and identify where the problem pain points are, what time of the day the user is experiencing that problem. Is it a problem that they experience individually, whether people around them face similar things? So try and ask questions which are more objective in that sense, and then help you build that objective framework that could be answered and utilized eventually. So I think that adds objectivity to some of the questions which are open to interpretation as such. And I think the other thing is, say, how do you democratize that? That's a very, very, say, complicated thing overall. But I would typically say the general consensus building that a product manager generally does across the organization is also centered around the user problems. So if you are able to cull out those insights around user problems and then broad base them across, say, what kind of user segments are experiencing some kind of problems, and you try and bucket them in there. I think that is where I've seen higher success rates with, say, building common understanding about what the research said.
Awesome. I'll open it up to the floor now. In terms of if anyone has any additions to some of the things we spoke about, in terms of what are some other new different challenges beyond what we've spoken about, if anybody has faced someone can think of.
To this, so one thing that I have observed around the effectiveness of user research is, being an entrepreneur and speaking to a lot of entrepreneurs, I've found one thing very common, that entrepreneurs are able to find the problem statement or the way to approach the solution much more faster, from another user base, right, or a research base. So one thing that I found is empathy is one thing which is making a difference there. Like once the user, researcher, or the product manager is able to empathize with the problem statement, I've seen them being much more effective with their approach of research, and also the insight that they're able to draw out. The questions are a little more pointed, clearer, and because the customer or whomever they're researching might wander everywhere, and they're able to bring them back to that point and synthesize the information much more better when they're able to empathize with the problem or the persona better. So this is one thing which I have seen as a primary difference, from good quality research or when we do focus group conversations.
Why do you think that is? Like, is it just something that's a natural ability of the entrepreneur? Is it something that they are just more curious and that's why they started doing it, not for any particular end?
So for entrepreneur, time is very important. Mm-hmm. We don't have time to talk to hundreds of people. Like we would want to come to a conclusion or narrow down to the problem much more faster, and thereby we filter a little more much more faster than the others. We try to with every interview we'll try iterating more, and then try to go closer to the solution faster. Primarily because we know the problem statement a little more strongly. So our questions are also framed around our experiences. We relate to experiences. So that's why I said that the quotient of empathy is much more high. And if the moment the quotient of empathy is high, I found user research to be much more effective.
And of course, there are formalized ways to do this. So there's a tool called customer empathy map that you could actually leverage. And then there are, of course, you need to understand where in that double diamond approach you are with respect to the research. Are you actually identifying a solution? Are you identifying a problem in there? And depending on that, there would be a lot of those frameworks. Of course, empathy, I totally agree. Say the person has to, product manager, designer, researcher, or for that matter, the entrepreneur who's really taking the org through, has to have that level of empathy with the users that he or she is trying to address.
Actually, to add to that point, right, I think both their points, we've seen user problem statements being easier, pain point identification is easier when they're more of stated needs. I think it gets even more bias prone and more tricky when we're trying to identify latent needs. Because today, every entrepreneur, so to say, is trying to look for that innovation or disruption that is going to happen with the latent need inside. So I think that's where I see a lot of people getting lost, teams getting lost, that, are we actually going in the right direction? Is this really the latent need? Do we really need to build out these solutions? And that's where the DIY platforms, or a lot of testing sort of comes into play, because that's the only way to sort of see what's really hitting the waters. So I actually found that very interesting, making it objective. Yes. And I found it very difficult that every time I came to latent need or innovation, problem solving, that objectiveness was getting lost a lot of times.
I think some of it is due to the fact that you were trying to identify the process.
Yeah.
And the process is a lot more objective when you actually try and understand that. So customer journey maps as a framework actually helps you ask those questions around those processes, rather than say delving too much into, say, a stated need, and then becomes difficult to differentiate between the people who've been more vociferous or having had a popular kind of opinion in there. So you would try and build that through a process-based mapping, and then implicit needs would come out of that process itself.
Yeah. A little difficult though.
Yeah, it is, of course.
Because I remember like content commerce when it was coming up. I mean, through all the research that we had done, the implicit need was not very clear until you started seeing other markets doing it, and then it's picking up, and then you sort of start playing with it, right? So it was an interesting one then.
Yes. I think there's one part to it where, yes, stated need is always the system to response, and latent need is more of what are you thinking on your mind. So it's more of a system on response. So more often than not, there is a little bit of cultural nuance to it. So even if you take India as a sector, or globally, probably a person from US, the way he would give a stated need versus system one, there's quite a bit of delta out there, versus in India, a person who is probably somewhere from the northern states versus the southern states, there would be some of the responses will be top box. So that is where gradually the world is also moving towards those behavioral analytics tools, which really figures out what the person really means through like a behavior analytic mapping or a emotion mapping versus asking them out. So I think gradually
I think you make a great point on like seeing what people actually do rather than just hearing what they are saying. Because I think a lot of, like you were talking about, like behavioral science research has now shown that in a focus group, people will say what they feel is like their ideal self. Like,
whatever you really want them to say.
Right? And what you think you would do. Like if you ask somebody, why did you save money? They will probably say, okay, because of retirement and I wanted to save this money. But if like, I'm giving an example of a very specific experiment that was done where in one case there was, I think saving money to your retirement account was a default option versus in the other, you had to opt into, right? Where on the one hand, when it was a default option, it was a huge conversion increase in terms of how much people actually save for retirement. But then if you ask both the groups of people, like, or the people who save more, you ask them like, why did you save this money? They say, okay, it was my goal to save for retirement, right? But so was it the goal of the other team or the other group, right? But they wouldn't say something as stupid as, oh no, it was just the default option, so that's why I saved. Which actually comes into what you were talking about actually seeing what people actually do in real life through the behavioral analytics. So what is what's latent need versus stated?
Pranay, adding to that, so one of the problem statement is like the objective driven analysis, right? It has its own constraints and bounds. The moment you put objective, people become bounded to the problem statement and try to work around it. I like the way the Toyota does, right? The Genji Genbutsu, which is more a power of observation. You go observe and see where are the areas to improve, right? So one of these things that we applied in Flipkart.
Correct.
So for example, specifically our grocery delivery is powered by a lot of observations that come from the ground, not powered by objectives and goals. So if you look at the slot selection, so there is a usual thing, right? If you ask a customer what is the time duration you want to deliver, he will talk about a short duration. Give me a product within an hour or within a specific time slot, right? Which is not actually the problem statement that we want to go after. So what we did is that we did a lot of dilos. Dilos is the day in life of the different customers that we wanted to operate in. And observe that some of the customers in, let's say, in Malaysia and kind of places, the customers are totally available all through the day. So the delivery can happen anytime in the day. So it's kind of flexible to deliver to them. But if you ask them, they will are very precise about asking for a morning slot or an evening slot, which is the most demanding slot. When we look at the DING customer, the double income, no kids customer, which is very popular in Bellandur HSR layout belt, we see that these are time crunched people, and actually they are the people who need a very specific time slots, etc. So the way we designed our system, and we backed up a lot of A/B experiments later on, is that if you are from Malaysia and kind of the locations, you are the shipping charges. We play around with the shipping charges to ensure that this behavior shipping is aligned to the actual objectives that the user wanted. Like Chandni mentioned, the latent needs or the latent problem statements are much understood through the various set of observation. One of the other interesting thing that we did is that this is about delight. So one is about avoiding friction elements and pain points, but delight understanding is very, very different. So for grocery is one of the in Flipkart, all deliveries happen to the doorstep, our customer doorstep. But grocery is one of the specific delivery that happens inside the house. It's not outside the house. It has to happen to the specific customer. It cannot be delivered to anybody else, our neighbor, etc., etc. So what we did is that the delivery has to happen inside the house. So the people don't like people who are like shabby or kind of untidy to come into the house, right? So all the grocery delivery executives are very, very groomed before they go into the delivery. The second thing that we had is that places like Bangalore, where people speak multiple languages. So the guy who is going to, the lady who is taking the delivery of grocery may talk in specific language. So the delivery executives are very well trained in 6 languages for Bangalore. So those are the observations came from, these are the inputs or insights came from just observation, rather than looking at an objective and solve for it. So we unleash some of the people who are excited to get into the ground, do a lot of observation, come with the insights. It need not be cost reduction kind of objective. It can be any delight experience. This brings up very, very beautiful instances to us. And another thing that I want to talk about grocery is that the way we designed our category is observing people who go to DMart. So you go and look at DMart people have a lot of time, right? And we took a lot of the thrown out sales receipts to identify what do they buy, where they got brand associated, where they do not have brand association, and those insights have been from some of the young interns and stuff like that, brought into it and designed the entire category experience. So it was very, very exciting. So the key point is that objective-driven exercise is good, but it also has its own drawbacks.
Agree. I just want to add to that. So objective, say when you mentioned objective-driven exercise, the objective was to actually observe the process. Customer journey mapping is basically understanding how the consumer actually interacts with that particular problem in general. Yeah. So that's different from asking a particular pointed question.
I think that reminds me of a very big aha moment we had at Flipkart, where we kept thinking that, we were trying to go through our objective format, saying that, okay, there is a pain incidence of delivery is very high, so maybe that's the first thing we should solve, until we started realizing that maybe installation of a TV is the second or third highest, but the pain intensity of it was much higher than the incidents, right? So a customer's okay if my TV came 2 days late, but he was not okay if it's not installed for 2 days because it's lying right in the middle of their living room. And that came from observation. Only when we went to their house and we realized there's no space and it's right in between, it's a big problem. It's unacceptable. So that sort of changed a lot of things in the way we started approaching insights. We said, okay, this is an objective, a quantitative way of looking at it. How do we make sure observational data makes its way to validate a lot of
Wonderful. Okay. Just extending the thought, right? I just want to extend that particular line item. So the moment of truth for the product, for e-commerce customers is using the product, not about getting the product delivered. So how close can we get to the usage of the product? Because the moment the product get delivered, like a TV get delivered at your home, the excitement increases. But installation only can lead to the consumption of the product. So if there is a gap between delivery and installation, which is wide enough, then that creates a lot of anxiety with the customers, and we want to quench it. This is like the power of observation came in. Absolutely. So we went into a model where we have delivery and installation comes very, very closer. the pre-planning of things happen much earlier. But when the product, even the delivery can take more time. But when the product get delivered, we want to shorten the time of installation.
It
Wonderful.
has to be
Thanks
within
for
2
that.
hours. So,
Thanks
yeah.
for sharing that, Chan.
That's actually brilliant. And now I'm remembering all the times I bought a microwave. That was the insight behind it.
So just to add to that point, observational user research is much more insightful.
Yeah.
But it takes time.
Yeah.
It's not very short where you can have half an hour discussion, pointed questions. So how do you
So
navigate
the reason about observation is not about asking questions. It's just to observe and be insightful about it.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So the way we do some of the things that we fast tracked in the recent company that I joined is record. We do a lot of recording, which is intrusive, non-intrusive of the user's job, but we do the recordings and then we consume that centrally. And we will also, like, we have we call all this early stage team members who are like interns or who are early stage product managers, etc., to do those observations and come back with insights, because we will not have time and energy to go to the customer location and get those things. So this was very useful tool that we.
We called it the shadowing methodology, even at Udan or even in Flipkart for that matter. I remember that we had to sort of sit and say, okay, let's start with the assumption that the customers don't know what they need. Or, there's so, especially with content, they will say, no, I will not click on this. But when you actually see the results of all the A/B testing, they have clicked on it, So how do you sort of get into the subliminal area where you know that this is what strikes?
I think we helped one of the largest OTTs in this part. So what we did specifically for scale and like how do you crunch it within 2 days. So we actually got the cohort they really wanted, and we defined the top 3 user journeys. And using the like consented eye tracking and facial technology, within 2 days we had like a set of 50 customers who we observed their behavior, screen recorded, what are the friction points they're facing, how are they reacting to it from the facial muscle movement, and where are they looking at it. And right within 2 days, we had a proper end dashboard, which you could mine data on. Or we also involved like some of our ex-Kantar, Nielsen, Ipsos, PS folks on it, and they just mined the data for them. So 4 days tops, while it was a difficult thing to have otherwise observed, they were able to churn out the insights, and which were very actionable and pinpointed.
Awesome. Going to move on to the next question. Before I do that, just one quick thing from your field. In terms of one of the challenges people kind of referred to but did not explicitly state was actually how do you get time and bandwidth for research prioritized, whether that's hiring a researcher, whether that's convincing your PMs and designers to drop the 13th thing on their list and instead go talk to customers. Like, how do you actually kind of shape that behavior? How do you, like the kind of subjective insights that you said, that just come from observation, that didn't come saying, I want to know this particular, whether this thing is true or not, but it just kind of happenstance came about, right? This kind of insight. So how do you convince people that it's a worthwhile use of their time? Because I found that very challenging.
Yes, it is. So I think, as I referred to the earlier scenario, so there are 2 types of researches. One are more broad-based researches. So, for example, what should your Razorpay homepage look like would be a much larger convincing exercise. You'd need marketing, branding, your founders, and or your product folks to actually align on that. So on those, you'd probably typically want to understand what is the problem currently, and then you try and understand how people have interacted, what it is not solving for, and then you'd probably build the case why you'd want to do the research. For the cultural change, especially within the product organization, I think as leaders, there have been instances wherein product managers in general have relied more on aggregate database researches or to build their hypothesis. I think both at Ola and at Razorpay, we've mandated that over a month you have to have a discussion with at least 4 of your customers in there, especially for the products that are user facing in that sense. So that is one way to do that cultural change, and then build those insights in terms of how you would actually build and share your quarterly roadmap. So there is a review, and then how have you used those insights through your interviews into your roadmap discussions. That is one way I've seen to drive that culture. Another way is to have a continuous stream of a user researcher, say a dedicated user researcher dedicated to 2 or 3 of your pods, wherein you have continuous stream of work as a backlog that you can prioritize for them. Used to happen in a similar way at Expedia and Adobe. For example, these are the features which are coming in, and then you would want to test the market earlier around those.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think, Himanshu, my next question is to you. And a lot of folks have actually spoken about it, spoken about the different types of user research needed at different phases. So, like, talk to me about what stages in the product development life cycle do you typically conduct the user research? I assume there would be across all at the scale of Samsung, but what is most important at what stage of the product development life cycle?
Yeah, so again, the 0 to 1 problem need assessment, that's more involved. That's where we have actually the UX research function play a big role. But the product managers are far more closely involved. We rely less on statistical data in that stage because these are all primitive stage exercises. So I would say that is very typical in B2B. So like the example, when I'm doing ads, if we are thinking of a new ad unit, there's one aspect of it where we want to understand the appetite for even that ad unit. Let's say you want to show on your TV screen a sponsored row, the way Amazon Fire Stick shows these days, right? There are two aspects of it. Are there people willing to pay for it? Now that would be fairly involved, product managers involved. And even how do you execute it from the agency perspective, UX researchers are involved. And then there is a more closed beta sort of statistical analysis, right? Which happens when you've gotten to some stage of development. Now you just want to make sure before you are actually doing it, are people clicking on it? That's again where the dashboard's coming. So like I said, across all products, right from need assessment all the way to feature validation, post-feature feedback. Samsung obviously engages with certain companies to get these scores. In fact, we have a lot of third-party partners, but I think in general, when it comes to post-feature validation, that's pretty much a third-party constant signaling. I can also talk to, strangely, as everyone mentioned, one contrarian point I've always had on that aspect, right? When we do tracking studies, right? One channel that everyone cares about is because the life cycle is so long and you want to understand the experience of the same user throughout, right? So in my earlier in my career, I used to work extensively with automotive companies. So the likes of Nielsen, JD Power, these guys have built businesses around tracking studies, right? And so these would be experience studies around how you're experiencing the car, the quality, features. They would also do conjoint analysis, right, where these latent needs you would understand. So you would basically do it for product planning. Samsung does something similar, right? Let's say you want to package the next 20K phone. Everyone wants everything, right? But how much are they willing to pay for it? So if you want to, break away from somebody's aspirations of a 20K phone, what are the features that really matter? How much are they paying for the brand? How much are they paying for the software? How much are they paying for certain feature sets, and how many of them they don't need? You cannot ask direct questions or leading questions. So you do the typical scientific conjoint studies, and automotive manufacturers do the same thing, right? So we used to work with them where the value of a particular brand or a feature, whether the infotainment system matters or to the user or not. Are they having trouble with the cup holder, or are they having trouble closing the door? There'll be tracking studies. The challenge is the moment this starts scaling, it becomes a self-fulfilling business in itself, and it starts giving numbers to meet certain business goals rather than really giving insights, right? So that's a challenge I've always felt, where the studies say something because you've almost gotten from that stage of formulating the study to now it's in running motion and it's just become another number that the business receives. Where when you actually go and try to understand why is there a problem with a certain feature, why are people complaining about a certain feature, the two don't match, right? So people are raising complaints, let's say, about the cup holder, but the studies have never really revealed that. So that's something that I've seen, that particularly with the post, when there is a product in motion, particularly a platform product, say like a Samsung phone or a car which is on the same platform doing facelifts for 6 or 7 years. You get habituated to the idea of customer research or user research in a way where it just becomes another metric and you don't get great insights.
That's a fascinating way to approach and approach speaks to the scale and how different customers' needs are, and actually being able to distill those down to what is important and not. I think Vinod, you had a few things to say as well about the different stages, and I think you can speak from this example where you said sort of your customer acquisition journey is like 180 days. So
Correct.
obviously the stakes are very high, and like a small bump in conversion actually means a lot to the way the company deals.
So basically, the ticket price is very high. So it's a lot of emotion that is associated with the decision for the consumer. So for us, every problem statement comes, say, from the business. So the business also comes with the problem statement as also a probable solution that they would want, right? And they have a lot of emotions associated with that solution that they're proposing. So we first start off with our research, understanding the problem, and we validate it with data. We try to understand what are the pilots that the business has done to address this problem statement from their own. So always digital product is not a solution to any problem. So that's something that we rephrase it into our mind. So we try to come with some process change, try to understand, tweak it, to fine tune a little bit of the problem statement. And then once we have understood the problem, so we deploy research, the product managers deploy research. To add on to the other point that we discussed, we have a culture of spending 20% of our time on research. We mandate it. The product managers, designers, researchers. Specifically, we have a day called focus day where we want people to be very close to the user. Cut off all the calls. Constantly validate your problem statements. What are you working on? What you're trying to deliver? What you've already delivered? So research is a constant activity for us. So we spend time in the problem ideation phase. Then we do something on the prototype. We engage the team again to go validate the hypothesis that we are planning to build on. And then during the build phase as well, because build cycles are very, very high, so we go with small cuts to validate if it's how much of the problem it's going to solve, and see how we can release solutions in phases so that how much of the pain point it is able to pull off. Instead of saying that we are building one big chunk and it's going to come after 6 months and that's how it's going to solve the problem. It's a big weight. So we always try to break the solution, start putting solutions in phases, and in each phase we try to go back to the users, go back to the business to understand how much it is called. Constantly validate, take their feedback, because we want finally business to be hand in hand with the solution, right? We don't want a situation at any time backing off saying that this is not what I had asked for, this is not going to solve. So we are constantly working with them. So I wouldn't use the word research; it's like constant working. Every fortnightly, we will want to engage to see how our solution is progressing, so that our hit rate on the final solution is very, very high. So that's one thing that we believe and we follow.
Super. That's actually very helpful. I think going to quickly move on. And I think a lot of people spoke about how one team is doing research or the other team is doing research, or sometimes in some great cases it's a joint activity. But the large majority of what you hear about this is that it's kind of done in silos, and some insight known by maybe the business team is not understood by the design team, or vice versa, or somebody who's working in customer support has probably an eye on some kind of customer problem that they probably don't have the kind of visibility or access to the channels to be able to bring that insight to the right people, right? Or that person is not listening, right? What have you seen work in your organizations that helps take some of these core insights that are really, really important and actually distill them to the whole organization that, hey, this should be a pillar of insight that we rely on for other things that we are building. It's kind of foundational. And Chandni, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think very rightly put, the longest time the pattern had been research happening in silos. And that's when I think we realize, and usually when you're in multiple parts of research, you realize, oh my God, these dots are connecting and there's no one to connect those dots, right? So very similar to him, even we very recently, Dan had started a user research team, which was under product design. But before that, marketing research used to sort of handle a lot of research. And of course, the problem statement, the methodology, the kind of questions you ask is very different depending on who's asking it. And that's why we decided, let's create a core team. If we all, the problem statement is to sort of revamp the whole homepage and understand why in a B2B context, some of the existing best practices of a B2C does not apply. How do we get these answers and make sure that every team, right, be it a graphic design team or a merchandising team for that matter, can use these insights to create some magic in their area? So we created like a core team where there would be a SPOC from every member, like a single point of contact from every team. And regularly, if there are any research conversations happening, calls happening, the 20% rule is something even we're implementing now, saying, can we pull them into this call? Will this be relevant for them? Making it a more collaborative and a participative process is what is seeing a lot of goodness now. That's what we've seen in the last few months. Of course, not everyone has to be a part of every research because time and bandwidth is a very big constraint. But wherever you're seeing close conversations happening, wherever you're seeing overlaps happening, this core team is responsible to make sure that information flows well.
Awesome. Anyone else want to speak to that?
I think there's one thing that's missing big time is a lot of teams do research. So product management does their own research, marketing insights team do their own research, a lot of UX designers do their own qualitative part. Like you actually do FGDs to figure that out. One thing that's traditionally not there, and it's a very simple solution, is repository. So today, if there's a research, or let's say you've joined Razorpay, let's say 9 months ago, you would have zero clue on what happened 2 years back, and then you were probably trying to move the needle until someone really tells you that, hey, Akhil, like we tried to solve for this.
Agree.
So there is no centralized repository out there where you can, like just put in all your FGDs, put in all your, like data that sometimes it's done outsourced to an agencies. So a couple of people have pointed that out as well. So there is no centralized place where, like you can just put in all your user research and maybe let the AI just map these based on, okay, these are the insights that was already there.
Agree.
Or have a manual part to it for the time being. So that's one thing that's missing big time in both the user research landscape and also the marketing research and insights landscape.
I think,
Please go ahead.
Sure. So I've seen this. So I think some of the larger organizations that I worked with, Adobe or Expedia, actually had a Confluence, had a research portal as well that you could actually search the reports in. But the issue is, say, what do you want to search for is not really
it's not tagged the
clear
right
to
way.
everyone, and whether that's been researched. So typically, a product manager was expected to search on that database before, say, getting into an inciting study. But that's something that is relevant for any organization there. For example, Razorpay, I've not really come across a repository here, for example. But then I'm sure there would be team-specific repositories that teams actually maintain.
Correct.
The problem there at times comes in wherein, say as the context changes, as the PMs change, as the roles change, teams change, some of that is just getting lost and buried under the overall pile of work.
This is true. And what happens is, again, with team changes or otherwise, like, most of it is SaaS-based startups. So people work for it for, let's say, 2 to 3 years, they move on. And what was developed in 0 to 1 could have been very insightful for the further scale up. And that A, that's not correctly tagged, and B, someone has to really dig down his or her email and find that. So that's where the challenge is.
We also have that problem of distilling. So I think some of these practices we follow where we have on Confluence, like a user interview library, right? All user interviews are recorded. All UX researches are recorded. The only thing is, how do you distill that? So if you expect a product manager to go through those interviews, do we talk a common language of research across all of them? Is there an ontology of user research where if I want to understand whether this problem has been explored before, I can quickly arrive at that history. So that, I think, is not an easy problem to solve also, right? So everyone's very keen to speak to users, product managers, PMM, everyone. And yes, you can expect them to dump it all together. And there'll be some organization. But yeah, you have to dig in deep to really distill information.
So
And
just
it's
just
a
on
sad-
addition to that
Yeah,
point,
go ahead.
just on that line. So I worked in Coinbase, which is a remote first company. So by nature, the company is siloed. So everything happens on all the information get coded in Confluence. So every information available in Confluence. But like the way you mentioned, right? Not everybody has time and bandwidth to go and read through the information. So what we do is that there is a summary. It's a three bullet point summary that is always presented as a table. So you can go through the details if you want. If you're interested on the summary, then you can go through the details by going to the recording and stuff like that. But every time it is a 3 bullet points. That's it. It's a very simple way to make sure that the information is well evangelized.
Yeah, I think that would actually be very helpful if there is a way to consume it consistently over a time period, right? Because what I realized in Udana, there were a few insights which had been lying with us for years, right? And how do I make sure that the pattern which is emerging is not lost? Because there's so much of research that happens and there's a clear pattern somewhere, which usually we can't see from wherever we are.
Okay. I think another problem when you touched upon the time aspect of it. So user research at times is relevant to a particular context and a particular time as well. So you might have actually, say, done a research on homepage itself probably 3 years back. Now the market conditions, your business model, all of that has changed as well. At times there is a need to refresh some of that research as well. And it's not an easy problem to solve. I've not seen multiple solutions across the industries around that. Maybe AI, as we actually go into the chat GPT world in there, might be able to solve this in future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance there.
Yes.
Like what is timeless, what is not, what has kind of changed with time.
Agree.
I think, and what you spoke about having repositories that are kind of easily accessible and
Distilled version.
searchable, and also kind of like you get the hook of what something is talking about without having to read everything. And I think these are some interesting practices that I will take back to my work. I think Chandni, you spoke a little bit about who all take part in research in your organization. So I'll kind of brush past that in the interest of time.
Yeah.
I did want to talk to you in a little bit more detail, Senthil, about what are the advantages and the challenges of actually now democratizing this. I think we spoke about the bandwidth a little bit. We spoke about how challenging this problem is of actually creating repositories or kind of stores of all this information. And so one is it even an advantage to democratize? Let's even question that and start there. And then how I think we spoke a little bit about the challenges of actually democratizing.
So in the recent experience that I saw, that democratization of user research 2 parts, right? The input to user research, and then there's output to user research, where how do you democratize the insight that is gathered from the user. So I will talk about the initial process of how do you democratize user research and whether that is the benefits to it or not, right? So clearly, for the organization like Sedwork, where we have globally present businesses and globally distributed users, it's very difficult for a centralized team to do user research, and it is going to be cumbersome. Thirdly, there is also the customer-related users, right, which is not very easily accessible for us. So we need to figure out all the interfaces with them and collect information of those customers through those interfaces. The interfaces could be sales, it could be business, it could be supervisors, it could be anybody else, right? So thereby, democratizing user research was a very important need of the hour for us, because the number of users are too high and you have a very small research team to go and fight for. So democratizing user research was an important part. Second thing that I observed is that the B2B businesses, right? B2B businesses have a long lead time to deliver a product. Not like B2C where we do quick iterations. So when B2B, we have a long lead time to do a product, it's very important for the product to be iterative. Because the user needs, like Vinod pointed out, that user needs changes, the market changes, the product need changes, the user itself changes, right? So these are some of the challenges that we face in B2B business. So we need to be very fast in iterating the user needs. And this cannot be done by a centralized team. This has to come from feeds from various, so the users who themselves can provide a lot of inputs if they provided a channel. Thirdly, I also found that making them inclusive of the solution is a feeling that you get when you do democratization of user research. If you hear a problem statement from the user in itself and you're solving for it, it makes him much more accountable to the solution. So thereby I found that this is a very important need of the hour. And also for a growing organization which is fast growth and things like that, you don't have a lot of time to do user research. So democratizing user research or decentralizing user research is a very easy way to gather inputs and insights. While all the advantages are there is also significant demerits to it, because user research is also a trained practice, right? It is not a general practice where you can go and do certain things. So generally we see the quality of input that come from these user researchers are not of great quality. Right. Secondly, it's also biased. For example, if you ask a salesperson who is interfacing with a customer client, he will give his own input, which may not be rightly in line to the objective of the product, right? So we also see that there is also a little bit color that comes in, and there's also a lot of overhead in funneling this information. Once the information comes to us, it's a lot of overhead to funnel the right insights to act on it. And also another thing that I found is that the motivation levels, when you do democratizing user research, the motivation levels of users also declines. So we need to create processes and systems to continue to keep the motivation of the decentralized user researchers doing the user research and providing those insights continuously. So those are some of the challenges that we face. The solution that we adopted is definitely some amount of incentivization and gamification we did. So whoever brings a lot of user research gets a lot of limelight, and some prizes and practices goes into it. That keeps the motivation level a little bit high. And secondly, what we also did is that we went into training the specific set of user research. So we understand that, say, a certain salesperson, hey, you interface with customers more often, you are the interface to that. We want to gather maximum insights out of it. So we want to train him against the biases, particularly on the biases, right? I think he talked about the psychological biases, like confirmation bias and stuff like that. But there's also cultural bias, like Raj mentioned, and there is also incentive-based biases that comes in. So we wanted to, we recently started a training program for all the people who are interfacing with the users, to go through some amount of training program, some amount of research-oriented program, so that they bring in right insight. So this is how the recent experience have opened my eyes into democratizing user research.
Nice. So sounds like lots of advantages, can be some demerits, but those can be solved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the merits overweigh the demerits.
Yeah. I'll open it up to more folks if any opinions.
Yeah, I think Senthil really touched upon a very, very important point around democratization of two different parts. So one is the outputs, other is inputs.
Yeah.
Say, I think inputs is where, say, you get all of the organization enthused about, say, using the tool, what is available, getting access to that. So I would probably talk about, say, some of the things that probably Adobe did, some of the things that Microsoft does. So a lot of the large kind of products actually have these user voice communities these days. A lot of those products that are on the app stores, they would also have their own communities with respect to the Play Store reviews and a lot of that. So that becomes a very, very good initial inciting platform for someone. And then that actually can lead to further researches for the organization. Typically, I would say in most of the organizations that I've worked with, product manager really is the centerpiece that actually evangelizes that entire inciting and user research across the organization. So I'm assuming that's why that is one of the pivotal roles of a product manager itself, and that's why it is important for the new age companies who are really into building innovative products to actually invest into this function. So product manager being one of those areas where you can actually centralize and say disseminate a lot of that in input as well as output. A lot of resources that should be accessible to all of the other users to within the organizations to do their research. There are communities on usertesting.com. For example, I think one of the companies that I worked with had a user testing account, and anyone could actually post in their prototype in there, as long as it was not say confidential in that sense. And you would get democratic inputs through that portal itself. So a lot of the ways through which you can actually just democratize this, both the input and the output process.
Specifically, the sharing of insights company, right? I personally feel that this is the first time I'm working with massive engineering teams. We have specifically for our ads team, we have a 200+ engineering group here, and one of the throughput/velocity challenge that we have is, as you say, the product manager has to evangelize. But if there is great data sitting behind, right, it becomes much easier to get everyone on board, right, as to why we are doing it. The biggest challenge I feel with making sure there is high velocity in the team is everyone on the same page as to why we are building a certain feature, right? Very often it is about, say, strategic decisions. So there has to be a cascade which the business has to do, right? Why are we building this? Why are we really going into this business? But when it's about features, specifically, those where people could have differing opinions, having some source of truth available to everyone, which you don't have to be the only communicator for. The product manager still has to make that decision. All user research doesn't convert into features. One challenge I very often feel is we do research with ongoing customers and they tell us what to build. They don't tell us our problems very often. They tell us exactly what they want, which is every product manager's nightmare, right? So, but once you have that consolidated, you have a very good basis to now energize your engineering teams, because that's one thing I keep hearing, right? Whereas particularly when features are tougher to build and timelines are crushed, everyone wants to know why we are making it.
Yeah, I think that's where the intuition of the actual person comes in, right?
Yeah.
Like the famous Ford example, right? When they were building a car, he said that if I ask customers what they wanted, they would say, I want a faster horse.
Yeah.
But, I was able to understand that latently, right? So,
Adding to what Senthil mentioned, that it is a very niche skill to do research, and it is not there with every product manager or designer. So making this information of input and output accessible kicks in a kind of FOMO in the product manager.
Yeah.
That this is how we have to go prepare, this is how we have to present. Otherwise, what we see is we send in a new product manager, an APM into the field, so they don't know what to even ask. They just go spend some time with users and come back, and then they say that, okay, can you document it now? So having access to all this information kind of trains them, how do you approach this, whole conversation, and then how do you distill the information that you got out of the conversation? How do you articulate the information and then present it? So, and making it accessible to all gives this as an additional
Advantage.
Yeah, I think I actually did read something very similar recently where they said that not every person who's having conversations with their customer is a researcher, right? So he might not be an expert, but can the expert team sort of help them structure this, create the rituals and processes required so that the format in which they're taking information and all of that is trained to a certain extent, of course. So I think that would probably be the sweet spot for, how do I find the balance of democratizing user research? I have these challenges, I have these advantages, but if there could be a hybrid way of experts working with the non-experts and getting the insights across, it'll be great.
yeah, I think a good distinction, which is professional researchers and then people who do research, which is everyone else, right? And how those two come together. I think someone did talk about how you use AI in research, and obviously with ChatGPT, and you can think of hundreds of use cases of how do you design a research questionnaire. You can think about how do you kind of generate a research objective from a customer problem and then make your whole plan using generative AI, which is, I think, quite exciting. But beyond that, right, given how nascent user research is in India, I think obviously globally it's a little further ahead. But what is, how do you see the function or the role of user research evolving in its kind of advisory nature into product building? And is there any role for AI to be able to go ahead and actually make researchers as well as the rest of the organization's life a little bit easier? And Raj, we can start with you.
Sure. I think first thing is across product, AI is used as a very generic buzzword which gets thrown around, quite a lot. So having said that, I mean, there's a lot of recent developments that's happening in AI. The first one that I want to talk about is there's a lot of FGDs and IDIs that happens across. I mean, this is a...
Can you expand on what you mean by FGD?
So focus group discussions and in-depth interviews where you talk with your cohort of end customers and you try to understand what are they particularly feeling in terms of the pain points or the functionalities in your particular tool. So one of the easiest way to take care of it is you just download and keep a repository of these FGDs and AI, of these IDAs, and then you just tag along each insight that you have ever found in that place. And the AI today is powerful enough to tell you using facial coding and voice tonality in terms of what is the stated response, what is the confidence rate in which this person is making that statement. So the latent response beyond the stated response. And then once you have tagged all of these, you club it into your insights so that irrespective of whether you are a part of that team, you are a part of separate team, everyone who has ever joined this organization can use this repository, which is very well tagged, and then you collect it on certain key pain points that you want to solve for. That provides you a repository. So that's one way. The second is gradually, like SaaS is booming in India. That leads to a lot of web pages, and eventually all the B2B and B2C startups want to get into mobile. So one of the other ways is you have an hypothesis in your first place, but again, that's a stated response that someone has provided you. But you track this with your top 10 or top 20 user journeys that you really want your users to use, and you use real, like deep technologies like eye tracking, heat map analysis, facial coding to figure out what are my friction points, where are my users genuinely dropping off, and why. So, this coupled up with another third AI term, which is called as benchmark. So once I figure out that, okay, I am having a certain level of, let's say, user journey friction points, and you want to solve it, what the benchmark does it takes care of cultural nuances. So it has run the algorithm through, let's say, 10,000, 20,000 human faces, and it recognizes what is a millennial's eye tracking data versus what is a Gen Z's facial expression. And then it tells you that, hey, you are Amazon today, but based on these user journeys, we'll give you a benchmark score, and this is the top 5 percentile or top 20 percentile, or these are the areas of improvement. So these coupled together, each one of it is powerful by itself. Eye tracking is very powerful. It's nowadays almost table stakes. Facial coding is powerful, and voice AI is powerful. But you develop a multimodal tool which takes all of these three solutions, and then you have a platform to take care of all your quantitative needs as well as your qualitative needs. So that coupled together, you can get researches done at scale within 2 weeks, 1 week, depending on the cohort. Sometimes the cohorts are a little difficult to attain. I think a lot of startups in India have realized that tier 1 and tier 2 sector has been squeezed into the last level. So now we really need to get into the rural sector, the tier 3. So that's where you can still do it at a scale which would not have been possible otherwise.
Yes, I think a lot of the challenges we spoke about at scale, right, and context, how do you understand that? I think you spoke to some of those things. Pretty cool how you can then take all these different nuances and all these different data points and very specifically to the problem of conversion analysis, right? And how do you actually get to like the why? Like you're saying, okay, this conversion dropped from this time to this time, but why did that change? Like how do you actually train an AI model to actually understand that?
So I think the why, the what is very simple, right? You figure out where the drop-offs are. That gives you okay, this page is not working, or this page has some issue. The why is where you actually get into the system and response, which is actually understanding muscle movement. So there are tools which can track up to 52 to 56 facial muscle movement, and then tell you based on each micro expressions, what is that user feeling at this point. And then you couple that with, like, hey, the user is actually frustrated when they can't find a CTA button. That gives you the exact why. And then once you have the hypothesis in place through this tool, you use an FGD or a focus group discussion or an in-depth interview to really get that specific pinpointed ask from the user that, okay, you dropped off at this point. Why did you drop off? We see that you were frustrated. Why? So that gives you like much richer and actionable insights than what you would have been doing otherwise.
Nice. I'll ask for two more things before we close. One is if anyone wants to add on to these conversations, and then we'll move into like a kind of fun, just brainstorm what use case there is for AI in user research. So if anyone wants to add on,
basically, I see AI to solve for problem scale. When you have a lot of data, information that you can't reach out within a short span of time, and you can get directional input. But when you're solving a 0 to 1, you shouldn't get into a biased view. With all the outputs in research that is synthesized from system, you can use it for direction, probably for validation, but you'll have to go with a very clear mind because it's really more interpersonal that you're trying to reach out. Like as you mentioned, it's the behavior that we are trying to catch. So that how close we are going to go is with time we'll be able to validate that. But for now, I feel it's like a validator, or like when you have a huge chunk of data that you have to process, definitely helps.
Agree. I think a lot of the AI that we talk about, it's a lot more larger in terms of the context. I think currently there's this chat GPT wave going on, so everyone is talking about large language models only, but then AI has existed for some time, but it had been very, very expensive. So I remember, say, even at Adobe, we had these labs which had people really experiencing products, and then we could actually record their facial expressions and then drive insights on that. But these were very, very expensive for us to really conduct. So very few products actually went into the product labs as such. And I think when it comes to the real value of an AI, I think it's not just about identifying the patterns, but also being able to generate insights. That is where I think we would want to get to, but it's not there as of now. I believe, based on what I've seen in the industry. A lot of the AI has been used on user testing or prototype testing. So to your point, Vinod, when you actually talk about how do you really define a very broad-based user research, wherein you want to understand the patterns of a user, behaviors of a user in a more open-ended form. I still believe that that's an area where a human researcher is required at this point.
Just to extend the point, I like the way Vinod you put together. So some of these techniques may be used for product iteration, but when you come to a 0 to 1 product, it is you have to go to a traditional method. There, I think the AR VR type of methodology should be very useful to us, because more and more the world is getting disintegrated and people are globalized and all solutions are going to reach the global customers. It is important to create some kind of solution which is immediately available to the users and create prototypes on the fly and then throw it on the AR VR environment to observe these things will be a very powerful tool to understand the 0 to 1 as well. Great.
Any more? Cool. Any other use cases?
I think you touched upon how might we kind of a scenario in there. So I think there is this whole world. We could probably start an AI company out of the ideas that come in of this room. But I think inciting is important overall, where there is a room for AI to develop further, right from, say, the basic level search enhancement in terms of identifying which research needs to be updated, which research is related to things that you would want to address. We touched upon that earlier. And I think to the point wherein, say, we would want real-time feedback and real-time insights coming in. So something that you talked about, which is AR, VR. If you've launched a feature in the market, and that could be a physical product, are actually getting real-time inputs, and essentially, I think that is one technology that could replace product managers in future. So if that actually gets
you need a product manager to do that product.
So hot take. We'll, make sure to make this the caption of the video.
So one
How to
thought,
replace product manager with AI.
one thought here is that again, I think same point that Noah also mentioned, right? When we talk of building a product or feature, high levels of investment, you're fairly invested. You want to layer it down in a way where you're probably sitting there and experiencing how the user is doing that, right? And AI naturally, at least the way it stands, lends itself to scale. When you're talking about building service experience, I mean, this is something we tried long back, but we ran into a bit of a challenge, right? So for example, sales experiences, and you were trying to understand waiting times, customer emotions at a dealership, and again, computer vision can technically solve this. The challenge you run into is privacy. But it's not just the design of the experience, but the management of the experience, where this has scale, because when you're running a franchise, right, and you want to be able to have a good metric to understand customer experience, and this could be a running metric through lots of stores and a lot of geographies. As a solution, it works, and it was always thought of in computer vision as a solution to gauging customer sentiment at retail outlets. Yes, how do you run? How do you fix privacy problems? How do you fix behavioral problems? Was the challenge, right? In our startup, we tried using computer vision to figure out how productivity in workshops could be improved, right? And people found out ways to, particularly in India, and you're going tier 2 and trying to install CCTV cameras and using computer vision to figure out whether somebody is fixing a car or just having a samosa by the side, right? But people find a way to block the camera and all of these things. So there are these challenges, but it realistically had a very good appetite, right? Because brands want to know how service experiences are at scale. It is a very unbiased, well-measured metric if it happens. The challenge is the privacy one. How do you circumvent that? In India, it can work. Nobody cares. But when you go to markets where you can make money of this, it's a bit of a challenge.
Privacy, coincidentally, we have tried to solve that in Entropic by we are GDPR compliant, although we take facial muscle movement and eye tracking into consideration. The way we do it is, although you are looking at the face, you are only giving the inputs in terms of, let's say someone is smiling. So you're giving that the initial lip length was 6 centimeter, now it is 9.5 centimeter. The eyebrow distance was 2 centimeter, but now it is 1.2 centimeter. So the person is frowning. So you're providing data without compromising on the PII data. So that way you can still become GDPR.
So you have some kind of an edge computing
yeah,
solution.
you have it, like you have it benchmark based on just Gen Z, old people, millennials and all. So that way you're still taking care of the fact that, hey, the privacy is not impacted. Because this is exactly what we were also trying to solve, that, hey, how is the movie going experience for, let's say, 10 people? Are they really enjoying the movie without compromising the privacy? So that's one layer that we built on computer vision.
Yeah, that's basically the PII information should not be accessible. It should be aggregated.
So you just get tester IDs that, so I mean, tester ID 1, 2, 3, 4 has taken the test and there's an emotional intensity of fear which is 25%, and that's it. That's the only data. And same logic has been applied on the qualitative interviews as well, where someone is able to take the test, you take all of these facial coding inputs, but then you blur the face. So while all of this is consented, but you're not storing anything in the background which will ever impact the PI of the person.
Just out of curiosity, I was thinking, how does insight analysis happen for such technologies, right? Because say, what if the same user, first he saw it and his expression was different, and the second time he saw it, it's different. How do you sort of get
companies are trying to solve it in two ways. I mean, most B2C companies, one is the customer acquisition phase, which is you're having a fresh user who has never ever used the product, and let's take Lenskart as an example. So how would a fresh user who has never used Lenskart perceive Lenskart, and can he get the basic work done, which is to buy an eyewear out of Lenskart? So that's the first part, where you obviously expect a person who has never used the product. But then the second part is someone wants, like, let's
repeat
say,
user.
exactly. So let's say MedPlus or Medibuddy or Pharmacy. One of them wants it, okay, now that I have acquired my user, how can I make the tool intuitive enough so that the user never faces a problem whenever he's placing the next app? So that is in the repeat user. Obviously, you would have that, okay, expressions will change, and there's a lot of outliers as well. That, hey, I had a fight with my wife, and would I be grumpy throughout? So, but
it's emotions.
That's facial coding in emotion, right? That's the reality. But once you weed out the outlier, here's the reason why Salman Khan movies work a lot in India and gain a lot of things, because what is appealing to the mass. So you can weed out one or two of these corner cases, exactly, and you just focus on the pattern.
That's so interesting. The repeat user journey could be so different basis this.
That's right.
Yeah.
But sportively, the frowning on the wife is not a corner case.
that is something I cannot solve.
Cool. I think this was super insightful. I know I learned a lot. So thank you again for sharing. I think I'll hand it back over to Abhay, but lots of food for thought.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed. Thanks.